Part of the reason so many people are excited about the Washington Commanders is all the turnover and changes that are happening. Part of the reason the win-loss projection is kind of low for the Washington Commanders is because of all the turnover and the change that's happening. Aaron Schatz of FTN comes through to help us discuss that on today's episode of Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, David Harrison, credentialed member of the media covering the Washington Commanders for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. And I'm here with you every Monday through Friday. Greatly appreciate you coming through every dayers. Thank you for coming back for your daily podcast covering the Washington Commanders. If you haven't already, you can subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you are listening to this podcast. If you're new to the program, thanks for checking it out. Hope you stick around. Hope you go back. There's also some good information. We're going to recap the week that was coming up on this episode. But first, Aaron Schatz of FTN is here to discuss with us, among other things, the FTN Football Almanac, a great guide for any football fan, especially fantasy guys out there like me. And then we're also going to discuss the season projections for the Washington Commanders, Jayden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, and more. If you want to discuss any of that after the episode, all you got to do is become a Locked On Commanders insider, and you can text me your thoughts, your questions, get bonus content, get exclusive access that goes beyond the show. Join subtext.com/LockedOnCommanders is where you sign up to become an insider today. Aaron Schatz is the Chief Analytics Officer at FTN and the creator of DVOA, Defense Adjusted Value Over Average. You've seen him on NFL Network. Now you're going to see him here on the Locked On Commanders podcast, and he's the editor of the FTN Football Almanac, arguably the most extensive season preview guide that you can get out there today. So let's bring Aaron in to talk about that and get his idea on where the Washington Commanders are going to land in the 2024 NFL season.
This is our big preseason book we've been doing for 20 years. We've got chapters on all 32 teams from all of our writers. We've got advanced stats, charting stats from last year, all of our DVOA stuff, team projections, and really good individual fantasy projections from the award-winning Jeff Radcliffe of FTN, all in one good volume. You can get it at Amazon for the physical copy or at ftnfantasy.com/almanac for an online copy.
Yeah, it's a lot of information, man. I haven't even gotten to all of it. I've read the Washington Commanders portion. I've read some like the Jayden Daniels stuff, and I'm a numbers guy. Like I call myself a football nerd, so it definitely speaks my language. I've got the PDF version. I'm definitely gonna get my hands on the physical copy as well. I like that physical copy in my hand. I don't know why, but it's a very good product. You guys do a lot of great work on it. I mean, I can tell there's a lot of effort put behind that. But let's get right to the meat of it, right? What Commanders fans want to know: how are the Washington Commanders going to do this year? Where do you project them finishing in the grand scheme of things in the division, in the NFL, just kind of overall?
We don't project the Commanders as a very good team. We have them near the bottom of the league. And the main reason for that is that you cannot expect rookie quarterbacks to be good. Mm-hmm. You have to expect that the most likely outcome is that a rookie quarterback will be below average, but sometimes they are good and sometimes they are terrible. And we really have no idea. As much as we want to watch the preseason and, make guesses about Kliff Kingsbury's offense and all of that stuff, we really have no idea of the rookie quarterbacks. And I'll throw Anthony Richardson in there with the rookies because he only played 4 games last year. We have no idea who's going to be good and who's going to be really bad and who's going to be just kind of bad and how they're going to develop over the next couple of years. So overall, you have to expect it's more likely that Daniels will struggle, and therefore Washington's projection is not strong.
Yeah, and even Jayden himself, we talked to him on Thursday heading into the long weekend and the little like pseudo bye that they get now between the preseason and the regular season, kind of said, I'm a rookie quarterback. I understand it's not going to be perfect all the time. And, I've got to get better at some things and do all that. So he understands that as well, but not just the rookie quarterback, right? Completely new coaching staff. Kliff Kingsbury, the offensive coordinator, and Dan Quinn have never worked together like in the same team. So they're kind of getting to know each other as they go. And then just the roster turnover. I mean, the offensive line only has one returning starter, or 2 returning starters, from last year. They've got a rookie left tackle. Like, how much do all those changes as well kind of impact the evaluation. Can you really get a firm grip of an evaluation of this team with all these different changes?
No, I think that this is a team with a very wide range of possibilities. I fully admit that offensive line changes are the hardest thing for us to account for in our projection system because there just aren't good offensive line stats that go back more than a couple of years.
No.
For individual, for like individual linemen. Also on defense, the two biggest additions are off-ball linebackers. And overall, historically, changes at off-ball linebacker do not move the needle. They really don't matter very much. Now, there are some off-ball linebackers who are exceptions, and we can sit here and debate. We have to sit here and debate. Is Frankie Luvu one of those? Is Bobby Wagner one of those? Are we underrating the Commanders' defense because we're not giving them credit for adding Wagner and Luvu? Yeah, that's an interesting argument. I don't know. Luvu's pretty good. I don't know if he quite reaches the Roquan Smith level of, makes a big difference. And I think 5 years ago, Wagner was at that level, and I don't think he is anymore. Not that he's bad. He's not a bad player, but I just don't think he's at that, he's an exception to the rule point at this point. And so, yeah, we didn't really give them credit for the two linebackers, and therefore their defense doesn't project to be very good because they made a lot of changes, and the two biggest ones we're not really giving them credit for.
Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of people who look at this team kind of sit at the 6-7 win mark. I know that's what a lot of the lines are at as well. And I think that's just
where
kind
our
of
projections are. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's just kind of how it has to be because of everything that is unknown until we start to know more. And speaking of unknowns, right, go back to Jayden Daniels real quick. So we know that rookie quarterbacks are oftentimes a mixed bag. We all would love to see the CJ Stroud, but I mean, if you watch the CJ Stroud tape, right, his tape isn't exactly flawless either. There's certainly some rookie things going on there as well. While the overall season projection for the Washington Commanders is a little bit low compared to where some fans want this team to be or believe this team could be, there are certain players like Jayden Daniels and Terry McLaurin who may have a little bit higher of an individual outlook from an individual stats perspective. We get Aaron Schatz' opinion on Jayden Daniels as a viable QB1 and Terry McLaurin, whether or not he's as scary as he has been previously, coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. Tired after lunch? You're not alone. Believe me, and the research actually shows that more than 70% of us hit the wall after lunch. So let a 5 Hour Energy be the boost, the shot that helps you leap over that wall instead of crashing right into it. 0 sugar and a convenient portable size. It's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. And the 5 Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, grape berry, and more. And on the site, you even have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors. It gets delivered directly to your door. Now, if you go to 5hourenergy.com, that's the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5 Hour Energy products today, you can use the promo code LOCKEDONFB to get 20% off of that order. This offer is only valid until September 30th. It's only valid on one order and cannot be used with other promotions or on subscription orders. So go to 5hourenergy.com today. Is Jayden Daniels a viable QB1 option in fantasy football? And is Scary Terry still scary? Aaron Schatz is going to weigh in on those topics and more coming up next. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen today and every day. For your second listen, check out the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast, where you can get daily insight on the best fantasy draft strategies to help you win your league this season. All part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Now, from this rookie class, so that was the talk of all the offseason. Like Caleb Williams was kind of the number one that everybody knew the Bears were going to go with, but there were actually people coming out kind of saying, well, maybe Jayden could actually be the best quarterback in this draft when all is said and done, or maybe JJ McCarthy and his untapped potential could end up being the best one 5 years from now. But let's stick to this year. If you're looking at just the rookie quarterback class, where do you have Jayden kind of projected to be within that group, considering, what is it, Caleb, Jayden, I think Bo Nix, right, are the only 3 solidified starters right now?
Yeah, I mean, we had Caleb Williams as the number one quarterback in our projections, which are not the most accurate thing that we do, certainly. But, we like Caleb Williams a lot. I believe we had Jayden Daniels second. I liked Drake May also. It's different, with Daniels, you get the mobility.
Yeah.
And you get he's more ready, but he's also older, which means he doesn't necessarily have as much development in him as May does. And his great performance last year came against a lot of players that were 2 or 3 years younger than him, whereas May doesn't have that because May was only 21 or whatever. So as a Patriots fan, and I'm a Patriots fan, my feeling was kind of I didn't care which one they got, Daniels or May, because they both had their positives. And then I considered McCarthy to be a bit behind that. Nick's a bit behind that. And then our projections did not like Penix at all. Like talking about age, absolutely. Like Penix was picking on guys who were much younger than him. And he had three receivers who went in the first 3 rounds. Like he had a lot of help in Washington last year.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. So that's something definitely to keep an eye on as well. But I think, I think most people coming out of the NFL draft or coming into the NFL draft, I should say, in the weekend, like that's pretty much how things aligned as well. But of course, history, once they set their history, it'll tell us who ends up being the better of the prospects.
Last year at this time, after what we saw on tape from college and what we saw in the preseason, nobody would have said CJ Stroud's going to have one of the best rookie quarterback seasons in history, and Bryce Young is going to be horrible. Nobody would have said that. We just don't know.
Yeah. There's a lot of impact there on just the differences from the game and, like you said, experience and all those things. So certainly a lot to look forward to. Let's flip over to fantasy a little bit here. If you're a Commanders fan, I know you're a Patriots fan, but let's say you're a Commanders fan and you want to get at least one member of your team on your fantasy roster, because that's what every fan wants to do. They want to get one of their favorite members, if not more. Who's the best guy in your mind, Washington Commanders related, to go after? Let's call it a full point PPR league, since that's the league that I play in.
Yeah, I still think Terry McLaurin is your best guy.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are very high on Brian Robinson this year, but we still don't know how much Eckler will take from him. Terry McLaurin is still pretty clearly the guy, but Jayden Daniels has a lot of fantasy value. Yeah. Like in a redraft league where you draft every year, I would take Jayden Daniels ahead of Caleb Williams, because even though Caleb Williams has more potential in the long term, Jayden Daniels has all that rushing value that he's going to have in the short term. And he's probably is going to be like bottom end starter, top end backup in your usual fantasy leagues. And that's that's a fun guy to have if you're a Commanders fan.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that bleeds right in my next question. Actually, like, do you think it's a risk either way? Like Jayden could he creep into that QB 10, 11, depending on how deep the league is, type of window? Is it worth the risk, like to stock up on maybe some running backs and receivers and get Jayden a little bit towards the middle of your draft and kind of bank on that upside? Do you think it's worth that risk?
Yeah, it's a great. I mean, the risk is not that he's going to be terrible, I think, as much as that he'll get injured, because I can't imagine they're going to pull him as the starter. They're not going to Mariota halfway through the year if Daniels is struggling. Like, this is their guy. He's the guy. And the rushing yards are coming, and the rushing yards are more valuable than the passing yards in fantasy. So I think the biggest risk with Daniels is something like Anthony Richardson last year, where he runs so much and then he gets hurt, and then you're screwed that way. But I absolutely think he's worth the fantasy risk.
I'm glad you said that, because he is on my roster. I don't know if I'm going to roll him out there as my week 1 starter, because I do have another guy on my roster, but I do have Jayden on my roster as well. So it's a decision I've got to make, but I'm glad to hear you say that. It makes me feel
I ended up with JJ McCarthy in a couple of leagues. So whoops.
Okay. Redraft leagues?
One is a keeper league and one is the Scott Fishbowl.
Yeah.
So he's still useful in the keeper league.
Absolutely. Yeah. You've been analyzing, evaluating, measuring, right? More importantly, NFL teams for a long time now. What's a realistic line? I know like the projection is 6 wins, 7 wins, somewhere between there. Well, how would you define a successful Dan Quinn, Adam Peters first season in Washington? Is it strictly win-loss, or is there another way to kind of measure success in this first year for this team?
Oh, you want Daniels to look good. It's not a win for this team if Quinn runs an above average defense, but Daniels looks bad. Yeah, right? Like that's not what the Commanders fans want to see. You want to see Daniels look good. Now, if Daniels manages to be an average starting quarterback, which is better than your usual rookie, but not as good as Stroud, and Quinn can manage a good defense, turn this into a good defense, it is absolutely realistic for Washington to go like 9-8 and sneak into the wild card discussion. It's not likely.
Right.
But again, there's hope, right? Like coming from New England, we're in the same position. There's hope. And so I think Washington has hope. Now, it also, Daniels could be terrible, the defense could be terrible, and this team could go 3-14, which I don't think would happen to the Giants. Like, I don't think the Giants are going to be that. Like, the Giants are very much just like, bleh. Whereas the Commanders are like this wide range of possibilities because the defense has so many new pieces, because you have the new coaches, because you have Daniels especially. But that gives you the hope, like, you can go into week one thinking, maybe we win some of these. And it's also, the other thing to remember is it is easier to be a surprise wild card team in the NFC than the AFC. 8 of our top 12 projected teams are AFC teams, which means even if all 8 of those teams are as good as we think they are, and the other 8 AFC teams are not, one of them still has to miss the playoffs. Whereas in the NFC, you've got, teams like Chicago and Washington could kind of come from the bottom with the rookie quarterbacks, or some team from the NFC South could sneak into a wild card because of the easy schedules that those teams have, or maybe Bryce Young finally puts it together. Like, there's a lot more mystery about the NFC.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, you got an AFC team out there, like you said, that could miss the playoffs. That could potentially be one of the more dominant teams in the NFC if they had that roster and coaching staff over there. So it's very interesting how the conferences kind of rotate. I remember in the 90s, like when I was a teenager, like the NFC was kind of the more dominant conference.
Right. And then in the early 2000s, we went through a couple of years where the AFC was super dominant, like 2004. And then it's come back around to that the last couple of years, that the AFC is just the better conference.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to talk about Kliff Kingsbury real quick to kind of wrap this up. You mentioned you're not a big Kliff Kingsbury fan. I know a lot of people kind of have their misgivings and are kind of, we're even here in the local media, people are kind of wondering, like, is this really going to work out? How much does the presence of Brian Johnson as the offensive pass game coordinator and Anthony Lynn, I think more importantly with his experience as the offensive run game coordinator, how much does that, if at all, maybe kind of help soothe some of those concerns you would have about Kliff coming back as an offensive coordinator?
My concern's not really about the running game, and I don't know much about Johnson. So it's more like the Cardinals offense had that thing where they constantly fell off in the second half of the season, and the route combinations got really dull and stagnant. And the thing where DeAndre Hopkins was always on the same side of the field, and then someone said that in the preseason, McLaurin has had the same thing going on, and that's like not a good sign. Like, move him around. He's your guy. Move him around. You don't want to make it so if you play, I'm just thinking of a team, the Bears. When you play the Bears, you don't want them to be able to easily stick Jalen Johnson on McLaurin, period, every pass. Like, you want to make it so that he's moving around so that Johnson can't necessarily be on him all the time. Like switch it up a little bit.
Yeah, no, we've definitely heard those concerns. I can tell you in training camp, we've seen Terry McLaurin moving around a lot more than we did.
Well, that's a better sign then. That's a better sign.
Now, we also saw Eric Bieniemy last year do a lot of things in training camp that we never saw in the regular season. So, it's like you mentioned before, it's all right now. It's largely speculation rooted in a little bit of knowledge. But of course, the season gets started next week, and that's when we really start to find out who these guys and the rest of the NFL teams are. So, Aaron Schatz, appreciate you coming through, guys. Chief Analytics Officer at FTN. So make sure you're checking out that site. Creator of DVOA, so he knows what he's talking about, and the editor of the FTN Football Almanac. You can catch a link to that on the site. We're going to drop a link here in the show description as well on Amazon and on the website. So make sure you're checking all that out. Aaron, thanks for coming through, man. Appreciate you.
Check out FTN, by the way, the new stats hub. We're going to have a ton of DVOA splits in charting categories updated constantly throughout the season. So you'll be able to get, for example, EPA and DVOA in man coverage versus zone coverage as of like week 9. You're not going to have to wait for us to finish all the numbers at the end of the season. It's going to be really cool.
Yeah, it's already really cool, and there's more to come. So definitely check out the site, check out everything going on, and check out the Almanac as well. Aaron, appreciate you.
All right, thanks, man.
All right, once again, that was Aaron Schatz, Chief Analytics Officer at FTN, creator of the DVOA, and the editor of the FTN Football Almanac. That link will be in the description down below. I've got it. I highly recommend it to any football fan, and especially fantasy football enthusiast out there. Now to wrap up the week, we're going to take a look at the week that was here on the Locked On Commanders podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by eBay Motors, who knows that passion, drive, and patience is what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die vehicle alive. And at eBay Motors, you can get everything you need to maintain your vehicle. You can get everything you need as well to level it up to peak performance, whether you're looking for superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered for whatever it is you are looking for. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you're always going to find exactly what you're looking for. And with the eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need, the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Wrapping up the week here at Locked On Commanders, and it's not something we can do every single week because the news cycle takes over, training camp, trades, roster cuts, all kinds of stuff. But we do like to, when we can, do our week in review to kind of let everybody know. We understand you can't come through for every single episode. So kind of go over the week that was so that if one of these episodes sparks your interest, you can go back and check it out. And of course, today, Aaron Schatz of FTN coming through, dropping some analytics knowledge, some fantasy insight, a little bit of a lot of things. Very, very interesting to talk to Aaron. And again, you kind of hear, right, the narrative that's going around, concerns about Kliff Kingsbury, even though he's got these other coaches in the room. There's a lot of people who are worried about what is going to become of this offense under Kliff Kingsbury. We'll see. We're about to get started as we roll into next week, right? And so we'll see what the overall product is. Of course, the Washington Commanders are hoping that new wide receiver Noah Brown, who last played for the Houston Texans, was also part of the Dallas Cowboys while Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. were there. Granted, they were on the defensive side, Noah obviously on the offensive side, but he's coming in. He's got familiarity with Dan Quinn and this kind of the way that this organization is going to be functioning here. And on the episode before this one, I went ahead, I did my deep dive over 100 snaps of Noah Brown football that I watched in the 2023 NFL season and broke down to you what's considered some of the most critical areas for a wide receiver to perform in. Told you what I saw on the tape, went over some of his strengths and even some of his potential weaknesses on that episode. Before that, we went over the 70-man roster. The Washington Commanders and head coach Dan Quinn specifically have been talking about the 70-man roster. It's not just 53 guys on the active roster, but the other 17 guys on the practice squad also matter as well. We talked about some of the guys that they brought back, and also that was the day we discussed the official move to get Noah Brown onto the team. Prior to that, of course, it was the 53-man roster. Before you can get to 70, you got to get to 53. And some of the surprises of the day, KJ Henry released from the roster, and of course, the absolute near decimation of the 2023 Washington Commanders NFL draft class. Talked about all of that on that episode. And then prior to that, to start off the week, we projected the 53-man projection or roster, and I am proud to say that it's not a 100% score. I don't think anybody ever gets a 100% score on their roster projections, but I only missed 5 of my projections. So I think that's a little bit of a self-pat on the back, self-congratulatory thing. Had a fun wager with some other beat reporters, and I did win that wager. So for what that's worth, you can go back and check out the projections and then see where we missed the mark, where we didn't miss the mark. And then, of course, go through the practice squad, the arrival of Noah Brown, and then ultimately here today, kind of an overall season preview look with Aaron Schatz of FTN. And that is the week that was at Locked On Commanders. I appreciate you for coming through for any of it that you were able to make it for. Appreciate you going back and checking out anything that you may have missed. Everydayers, you already know it because I tell you every day, but I appreciate you coming through every day. We'll be back to start the week off on Monday with even more content. We don't have practice till Wednesday, but we're still going to be here 5 days next week as we lead up to week 1 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Already some interesting quotes coming out of Tampa and Washington about this matchup before we ever really even get fully started into the week. So we'll be back with that. In the meantime, if you've got any questions or comments, all you got to do is send me a text. To do that, all you got to do is go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnCommanders. Become an insider today. Text me your thoughts. You'll receive mine, and you'll get bonus content and interactions with me that go beyond the show. For your next listen, check out the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast and get your daily insight into fantasy strategies that are going to help you win your league this season. As always, thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day, every day. Thank you one more time for coming through every single day. Until we speak again, if you're out and about, please be safe. Enjoy the holiday weekend, and I will see you right back here next time for another episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.